Hi, I'm Keith York with Agents of Architecture. I'm here today with Ginger Weatherford, and we're going to talk to you about historically designating your home or buying a historically designated home and the Mills Act, which people often think about as the tax reduction part of the process. Good morning, Ginger. How are you?
Good morning, Keith. I'm well. Thank you so much.
So I think for viewers out there curious about buying a historically designated home and or historically designating their own home, there's some pitfalls and it's quite a dense process. Are you okay with going on this ride with me?
Yeah, let's dig in.
Great. So if you own a historically designated home, you might want to keep watching because there's a lot of interesting things that have come about in our conversation today. If you're looking for a historically designated home or considering designating your own home, Ginger's a great person, a historic preservation consultant. What's your title?
Yeah, I'm an architectural historian and a historic preservation consultant. I earned a master's of preservation studies from Tulane University School of Architecture.
Fantastic. And we're here in San Diego today, but this is applicable throughout much of the state of California, wouldn't you say?
Yes, most of the state, it's a program for the state of California. The Mills Act was started in 1972 by Senator John Mills, who's actually from San Diego.
Wow. Well, John. And John, may he rest in peace, is why we're here today, almost, right?
It's true.
So say for a moment you think you have a historically designated home, or you're working with your real estate agent looking at a historically designated home. What's the first part of the process for hiring someone like yourself, Ginger, or what are the early questions that buyers have regarding these interesting homes?
Well, first off, they want to see, well, does my home qualify to be historically designated? Because most people ask me, how do I get the Mills Act? And so the Mills Act is something that is for locally designated properties. So first they have to see if they qualify to get locally historically designated. So they have to contact their city or county, whoever they need to see, preservation planners. They have all of the requirements that would be needed to do a report to turn in for historic designation.
So one of the interesting things that happens in our line of work is real estate agents are asked a number of questions. So, for example, if a house is not historically designated, do people ask you, is my house worthy of being designated? Does that come up?
Yeah, they do. And most of the time I just ask people, well, what's your address? We'll look at Google Street View and tell you my opinion from there. And most of the time I can tell, as long as there's not too many trees. But yeah, so then I say, okay, well, if you're interested, I can come out to your house and we can do an assessment. And then I give people an estimate on how much it's going to cost and what the timeline is. And it typically takes me like 60 business days, as long as city and county are cooperative on giving me all the information.
I could imagine. So you take a look, so as a consultant, you look at Google Street View, you come out to the property and you say, this looks historic. We'll start digging for more information, right? So that's the first, is just taking a first look at the house?
Yes, because most of the time the property would be eligible for designation based on architecture. So the architecture needs to be as close to original as possible for the integrity to still be standing. So.
And obviously we're having this conversation in Southern California, but George Washington didn't sleep in any of these houses, right? There's this sort of old colonial America thing where something very historic happened on site, a Civil War battlefield, something, right? We don't have as much of that. It's mostly architecture.
Mostly, yeah, and sometimes it's for if someone that is an important person within the city of San Diego or whichever city you're in, it can be designated based on important person as long as they have done a majority of their work that made them an important person while they were living at the property or while they were working at a place, because it's not necessarily just for residential. It's also commercial buildings can also be historically designated.
Oh, that's great to know. So if someone asks you, is my house historically designated, they hire you and you start sifting through what? Photographs, maps, architectural drawings. What is the fabric of what you're trying to understand to make sure it is historic?
Yeah, mostly I go and look to make sure, as my preservation instructors told us, to sharpen our eyes. To see if there's any details where you say, oh my gosh, when was this done? Did they alter this like in 1985 or something, and didn't make it look like the original? So, because things can be changed on the property as long as they've been maintained where it looks still like the original. So they say replace in kind, so that you can't say, oh my gosh, that doesn't belong.
So you'll look at contemporary photographs, maybe some vintage photographs, maybe architectural drawings, aerial photography sometimes?
Yes, definitely. Historic aerials are definitely important, and the site historicaerials.com has been a lifesaver. Also different local historic societies and agencies will have historic photographs here in town. The San Diego History Center has a huge collection of street view pictures, of aerial pictures, pictures of individuals that are important within the city and county. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different repositories of information that you can find. Historic photographs, sometimes you have to reach out to the previous owners. And that's where the chain of title really comes in handy. So one of the first things I do is ask a title company to do a historic chain of title. They will research back to before the house was even put on the property to see was it someone who developed this house as a speculation house and they never lived in it, or was it an owner that asked someone to build it for them? Sometimes it's done by an architect that is considered a master architect within the city, or a master builder. Sometimes it's an individual homeowner that designed it themselves, and then they get a builder to help them build it. So the chain of title will help discover who was involved when the property was built, and a key part of that is the notice of completion. Because the notice of completion will tell you who the owner was and who was either the architect or the builder. So that way you can do the research on those people to find out who they are.
So we'll reiterate, maps, aerial photographs, vintage photos, looking at the house as it stands today, chain of title, notices of completion, building permits to see who the people were, when they did stuff, when they built the house, when it was dirt, right? You start actually when it was just land, right? And then you go all the way through electrical permitting, plumbing permitting, sewer connections, notices of completion to build the case of this is how and when and who built it, right?
Yeah, and the sewer and water hookups are really important, because sometimes if you can't figure out who the architect or builder was, sometimes they're the ones who initiated the process to get those water and sewer hookups. And that helps you to determine the actual build date.
Right.
Because sometimes the build date that the city or county has, is not the correct date.
Right. So whatever municipality our viewers out there live in, whatever part of California they might reside in, they're going to different government agencies to retrieve some of the puzzle pieces to build this report, right? We're building a report to give to the local government to evaluate whether it's historic?
Yeah, it's in San Diego, it's called a historical resource research report.
Okay.
In different other cities, it can be a landmark designation report or a determination of historical significance report. And the report is a collection of all of those elements, you know, the Sanborn maps, which are the fire insurance maps, they will show you a footprint of the property over time. Those are really important. The historic aerials are also really important to go along with that. Just, you know, any of the maps, topographic maps from the USGS, all kinds of information, historic photographs that show the house itself are really important. But if you can't find those, sometimes you find like family photos where the people are standing in front of the house. And you might be able to say, oh, I can see a corner of the window.
All that can be a good thing to have, a material ingredient of the destination report, anything and everything. And you're the one authoring, bringing all of these items together to present to the municipality, saying, as the historic preservation research consultant, here are all the things I found about this property and all of its owners. We think, the homeowner and I, yourself, think that this property is historic, correct? You gather together a number of things. You'll look at probably on your screen somewhere here and see kind of a list of some of these items, but you hand them a report. And that report takes you 60 business days, more or less.
Give or take, yeah.
Okay, you charge a fee for that, and you submit that to the local municipality that governs this process. Who reviews it from there after you turn it in? Like, who, does the mayor look at this? Like, who takes a look at this?
I don't know if the mayor has ever looked at any, but it would be nice if he did. But the preservation planners within the city or the county are the ones who review the reports. There's usually a historic resources section of the planning department. It can be, you know, one person, it can be 5 people.
And some municipalities do not staff this activity at all, correct?
Right.
Right. So some cities, municipalities in the state of California do not actively engage in this activity, do not have full-time staff working on this. So where we live, where we're shooting this video in San Diego, we have a few people on staff. They're in the planning department or the area of the municipality that hands out building permits and sort of taxation. I mean, we're getting close to taxation, but does the planning and building departments revolve close to those that deal with property taxes, or are they far away?
Well, the city and the county work together with the property taxes, but the county is who decides what the property taxes are going to be.
Okay. And how do the volunteers, I know where we live, maybe not where you live, but where we live, we have a historic resources board staffed by volunteers that are from some of the building and design trades, and they, after the city staff look at the designation report that you've turned in, these volunteers look at it. What's the volunteers' role, and at least in our area?
Yeah, so the Historic Resources Board will receive the consultant's report that was turned in to the Historic Resources staff, and someone on the staff will write a report that goes with the consultant's report. And it's kind of an executive summary, so that in case they don't want to delve into all 100 and something or 200 something pages, these reports can get pretty lengthy with all of the requirements. And it kind of gives them, you know, okay, this property we believe is eligible for historic designation based on criterion A, B, C, D, and they give the reasons why, based on their opinion, but also based on the evidence that was provided in the historic research report.
So you're writing kind of a book. I mean, this report is not taken very lightly. It's not a thin document. This is a pretty serious work of your authorship, correct?
Yes.
And when you talked about criteria, you mentioned that a couple of times. I understand somewhat naively, right? You're the professional here. There's 5 or 6 criteria that you could designate or they qualify a home for designation. Maybe you could walk us through what some of those criteria might be.
But each municipality has its own criteria for designation, and they usually base it on the National Register criteria. And within California, the California Register criteria, and each city and county comes up with their own to kind of go with where the city is. So for San Diego, we have criteria A, B, C, D, E, and F.
Okay.
And criteria A is for special elements, and that is something that where if the property represents a special element of, say, architectural development or engineering.
So there's something unique about the structure?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it could be archaeological development. It usually is based on like a context statement that is developed based on the neighborhood or the city or a style of architecture. So property could be a special element representing a piece of the modern architecture, and so that way it would qualify for criteria A.
Okay. And so going to F, what's criterion B? How does that read from your perspective?
Criterion B is for important person or for an event that happened at the property. And an important person is someone who has done something within the city or the state or the United States that is considered important. Say someone invented something that is revolutionary or
So you would in essence write or understand in your reporting the biography of this important person. So you would make the case that you or me or someone out there was important, and then they resided at this home for a period of time, or did work if it was a commercial property of some magnitude.
Yes.
Understood. Great.
Yes. The reports are actually kind of like being a lawyer, where you have to present the evidence for each of the different criteria.
Okay.
So you have to show why or why not it is eligible or not eligible under each of the different portions.
Right. Does it take one? So if you say, as a consultant, criteria B, important person resided here, is that enough to get designated? Just one criteria?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, well, within the city of San Diego it is.
Well, agreed.
Some other municipalities require 2
Okay.
criteria.
So on to third, criteria C. What is criteria C in the city of San Diego?
It's for architecture.
Okay.
So if it represents a certain style of architecture and it is a good representation of that style, then it has to maintain the character defining features of that style. So there's lots of documentation on what is considered to be the elements of a certain style.
So if you look at a building, you say, okay, that building's architectural style is modern. It is mission style. It is craftsman. One of these larger contexts. And then you have to describe the elements that make it so, right? So it's not just a craftsman home because you think it's one. You have to say it's a craftsman home because of these elements.
Right.
And they're still there. The homeowner has still retained those elements.
And that they are mostly the original ones from
Okay.
the day it was built.
Okay. And so I'm sure you could say this faster than I. What are some of the styles? What are some of the styles that come into play under architecture?
Well, there's several different styles of Victorian architecture, and Art Deco, and streamline modern, and craftsman, and Spanish eclectic or Spanish colonial revival. So in Southern California, there's a lot of ranch houses that done in the 50s and 60s, and they are considered minimal traditional. And then there's different types of modern architecture. So some, when people think of mid-century modern, is usually post and beam, or the organic architecture, organic modern. So there's a lot of different styles within Southern California. Other parts of the country have different styles because they are older than we are.
Right. Yeah, I think as we look at just how your municipal area has developed over the last couple of centuries, right? Whether it's the San Francisco Bay Area in the 19th century gold rush, all the way up to more contemporary homes, right? So what if I have a postmodern home that was built in the 70s? Am I pushing the limits on what is historic? Like, what does the word historic mean when we think about age?
Usually it is something that's at least 45 years old for the city of San Diego. The country is usually 50 years old. Some also, the state is usually 50 years old. However, there have been some recent changes in that where anyone can choose to put their property up for designation no matter what age it is. So
for some of these other criteria, or just because it is special in some regard?
Right, and I guess the thinking is that if we designate it now, that it would be, even though it's not necessarily 45 years old, that it will be. So in order to preserve it the way that it currently is, we'll put the protections on it now.
Nice, that's interesting. So forward, sort of future-proofing, forward-thinking about work that is not old today, but will be old.
Right.
As all of us get, right? We'll all get old someday.
It's a future historic property.
Yes, there we go. I like it. So our fourth criteria D, what's criteria D all about?
Criteria D is for an established master. So it could be, different municipalities have different people that they've established as masters. So there's the master architect, master builder, master landscape architect, master engineer, the different elements of the building trades. So in San Diego, we have lots of master architects and master builders, and there's representation of their work.
Right. So it doesn't have to be by Frank Lloyd Wright, right? Like it can be a regional, high caliber professional from decades past, right? It could be William Worster up in the Bay Area. It could be Richard Neutra in the Los Angeles area. It could be Lloyd Ruaco in San Diego. And then when you go all the way back to the 19th century with some of these Victorians, it's less about the architect and more about its integrity. It represents the style, right? And so earlier, was it criteria B is architecture?
Criteria B is for important person.
Okay. Criteria C is architecture, and criteria D is the actual architect, the person.
Right.
Okay, great.
Yes, the design.
Thank you for clearing up. There's two criteria that might people come to you and say, I have an architect or architectural home, right? But it could be either of those criteria, architect or architecture.
Right.
Got it, okay. So what's criterion E?
That is for a property that is considered to be eligible for designation within the state of California or within the entire United States.
So that's a bigger deal, right? Like it has risen to some level where it's not just a local designation, a local unique property. It has some story to tell that's broader to the state or the country.
Yes.
Wow, that's neat. Criterion F here in San Diego. What is criterion F? This is our last of the 6.
I know, I was like, how many? Criterion F is for historic district.
Okay.
So if there is a collection of properties within a certain neighborhood and the city or residents within that area want to have it as a historic district, then they will present it as an entire report for the whole neighborhood.
Right.
And now it can be also not just neighborhoods, it can be based on different architect designed properties or types of architecture, like bungalow courts. You could have a historic district for bungalow courts, and they're not necessarily all in the same place. They can be within the city of San Diego, and they can be in
Different parts of
the city.
municipality. Wow, that's interesting. So you mentioned something earlier about how people come to you, or we were talking about how people come to you. So they think their house is special, their commercial building is special, but now also I live in an interesting, special neighborhood that when passers-by or someone drives through my neighborhood, they're witnessing history on both sides of the street, as it were, when they drive through. I think that's really neat. And all the houses, or just many of the houses, several of the houses have to have the curb appeal of that style or that period?
Yes, and there's usually a period of significance for the historic district, and it can be a range, it can be from 1900 to 1970. There's going to be some pretty wide ranges. And as long as the property meets certain criteria of the integrity is good enough. Historic districts have a little bit lesser degree of formality with when they're deciding if a property is eligible within that historic district than if it was to be an individually designated property. So sometimes a house can have the siding changed, but it still presents as, say, a craftsman architecture. And so it's considered a contributing resource within the historic district. And then there's also non-contributing resources within the historic district. So if you're in a historic district, then you get to have designation.
That's great. And we were having a conversation recently with some homeowners that live in condominium towers that have been designated. So like a historic district, it's a vertical representation of that same idea that everybody's condominium within the greater whole, if it has been designated, are contributors to that. It's almost the same, am I right? Is that different?
It's a little different because it's based on the building itself.
Mm-hmm.
So if the building is designated as a historic property, then every unit within that building is eligible to apply for the Mills Act, the property tax abatement program.
Right, and we're going to get to that in a minute. And thank you for continuing to watch our discussion about historic designations with my colleague Ginger Weatherford. I'm Keith York with Agents of Architecture in San Diego, California. The next part of our conversation, Ginger, so you've created this historic designation report. You've handed it to the municipality with the homeowner's blessing. They've paid a fee to the municipality to be like an application fee. They've paid for your services. Now what happens?
Now we wait for a hearing. And depending on the municipality, it could be the next month or it could be the next year.
So the timelines can be wildly varied depending on where you live and the number of historic properties that are being, or I should say historic homes that are being applied for designation.
Yes, and it does have to do with the amount of staff that
Sure.
the department has. So sometimes if they only have one person, they can't do too many at a time.
Right.
So, but they decide how many per month can be heard. So then if a lot of people apply, then the queue gets pretty long.
I see. So at the hearing, so you're a homeowner, you've applied for historic designation. They tell you via email or something, like they write you a letter saying your hearing is next Friday. What would we expect at the hearing?
At the hearing, the homeowner is welcome to attend. They do not have to attend. The consultant would represent them at the hearing. It's kind of like being a lawyer, present the case of the property. So within San Diego, it's that there's a meeting, the Historic Resources Board meets, and the city staff present each of the different properties to them with their report that they wrote, kind of the executive summary, and they will say whether they think it's eligible for designation or not.
So they vote.
The board will then deliberate and they will decide if they agree with the staff. Sometimes they don't agree with the staff. Sometimes staff says, we don't think this property is eligible for designation, but a majority of the board thinks that it is.
And that board, the volunteer group, tell the municipality yes or no, in essence, okay. So say I'm a homeowner, I've applied, I'm at the hearing, and they vote yes. And I'm excited, I guess my house has somewhat officially been designated historic by this group. What happens after the deliberation and the approval of historic designation?
There's an official document that's drawn up that shows the name of the property and the resource numbers, and that gets recorded with the city and then with the county. And then if your municipality participates in the Mills Act, then you'd be able to apply for the Mills Act.
Okay, so now I have ostensibly, my house is ready for that historic plaque. And now I'm thinking Mills Act. So John Mills, a long time ago, started this process called the Mills Act. And once we have a plaque, once our house has been designated historic, we can then apply for Mills Act protections, tax abatement. What's going on with the Mills Act after we get designation?
It's a program to help homeowners to be able to afford to preserve and maintain their property so that it keeps the integrity of the historic resource.
So the principle is less taxes, more homeowner expense to keep their home looking good from the street. I'm exaggerating, but that's sort of where we're at, right?
Yeah.
So we have historic designation. We want the tax relief. We would like to invest our personal tax dollars into the maintenance and upkeep of our home. But I enter into a contract, don't I? Don't I tell the city or the municipality that I'm going to be a good steward or homeowner of this property?
Yes, and there's a document that's drawn up with the homeowners and the city agency or county. They prepare a list of items that are going to be done over the next 10 years, and the contract is for 10 years, and it automatically renews every year, so it just keeps going.
So I'm a real estate agent with Agents of Architecture, and you're a historic preservation consultant. Obviously, real estate values, or at least the thinking, the thought, the motivation sometimes are taking real estate values into consideration when they get their home designated. Do people bring this up to you? Is it important to them, or somewhere in the mix, to have the property that they own plus or minus? Are there some upsides or downsides to having your home historically designated when it comes to real estate evaluation?
Yeah, actually, a lot of people believe that historically designated properties would be less valuable, but that's actually not the case. They actually are more valuable. The property is considered to be really desirable for future owners, and so that makes the prices go up.
Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of, as I drive by a home that has a plaque and it's beautifully maintained, that's a desirable property, right? Maybe not the one next door, but wow, look at that one, right? And then if I'm invited in to a party or an event in the home, I walk by this oval plaque that says something about its history. I walk into this wonderfully maintained time capsule of sorts, and I enjoy an evening with my friends that I've been invited over to visit. I enjoy it in a unique space, right? It's a totally different experience being in a historic home, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. You can feel when you're in a historic property. It's not the same as when you go to, say, the mall. Although the malls can be historic properties too.
And I imagine part of your passion driving you to do this work is you've been in a lot of historic homes and you appreciate the interesting, unique time that you've spent with others in these spaces. Could you talk about your passion a little bit?
It's funny how my passion came to be. Growing up, my mom would take these books that had the floor plans of houses, and she would redesign them. And she was really interested in architecture, and we would drive all over San Diego looking at model homes. Sometimes mostly they're new houses, but sometimes we would drive to the historic neighborhoods and just look at them. And most of the time we couldn't go in. So in order to get our fix on the architecture, we would go to the different properties. And one day we went to 42 different open houses.
Wow.
Because they were mostly in.
And you weren't even buying a house, right?
No,
you were just going to see houses.
It's the looky-loos.
Nice.
And now people can do that virtually.
Yeah. There's a lot of websites where you can visit homes that were once for sale, right? And see the pictures online.
Right.
So I have, one of the things that we're asked as real estate professionals is how does the valuation change once it's historic? So one of the things I say often is if I'm looking at two properties next door to each other, one has a plaque and Mills Act tax reductions, which in some municipalities could mean half of their the annual property tax fees, and a house next door to it, which is perfectly nice, it's a lovely home, no plaque, no designation, no Mills Act tax protections or abatement, and yet they're both for sale at the same time. So why would I choose one or the other? Do historic properties take more work or more maintenance, or are they comparable, would you say, to a next door similar property?
Well, it depends on the property, obviously. Some of the houses are in really good condition and don't require a lot of maintenance. But just like any property, if it was built yesterday, it's still going to need to have maintenance over time to keep it looking like it did the day that it was built.
Right.
So, with a historic property, it's being part of the history of the neighborhood or part of the history of the city, and the architectural history helps us to know where we've come from so that we can see where we're going to go.
So sometimes the beautiful neighborhoods with beautiful historic properties on them tell us a lot about the city that we've grown up in, that we've moved to recently. We understand its history and we can think about where it's headed in new directions and new developments, be that in the built environment or in other parts of our cultural lives. Wow. I'm Keith York with Agents of Architecture. I'm here with Ginger Weatherford, Historic Preservation Consultant, and we're here to ask for your comments, your suggestions, so get in touch. One of the questions that homeowners often ask as they're approaching buying real estate or as a current homeowner of a designated property is, what can I and can I not do with a historic home? One of the things that we often say, both Ginger and myself, is on the inside of the home, you have a pretty wide range of opportunities to remodel, to repair, to update, upgrade, etc. Correct?
That's right, as long as it doesn't affect the exterior of the property.
Okay. Things that affect the historic character of a home on the exterior would be like what? Dual pane windows? What are the...
Windows, doors, if there's any additions, changes in the siding, things like that.
Okay. So if somebody were to say, I want to buy a historic home, I want to remodel the bathroom, that's okay. I want to remodel the kitchen, that's okay.
Yes.
I want to put fancy cabinetry in my garage, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but now I want a new garage door, a new front door, and dual pane glazing facing the street. That starts to get into some problems with the unique character of the home.
Yes, in fact, the entire property is considered when looking at the integrity of the property. It is the cumulative changes that have occurred over time to decide if it's something that is eligible for designation or not. So even though we can't see the rear from the street, it could be considered something that if you've done too much to it, if it's had too many additions, too many changes over time, that it might need to be put back.
So the general circumference of the house, regardless of its street-facing material.
Yes.
So you'd probably, in those cases, want to work with a craftsman, artisan, contractor that's sensitive to working with the municipality on those character-defining features and making any new material look exactly as if it were historic fabric. So it's possible to do dual pane glazing inside the framing of a window to make it from the street or whatever the visitor's vantage point is look historic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and as long as if there's muttons and mullions of divisions between the windows, as long as those look like they are actual wood or metal, whatever the original fabric was, and not the ones that are just like the faux ones. You know, they have to have true divided lights.
Yeah, yeah. So from the street, it still looks like a Tudor house, but it could have a new kitchen, a new bathroom, new flooring, new lighting, and it could have dual pane windows that were not there when Tudor homes were built originally, but they have to be of a caliber, and the installation has to make it look as if they are historic windows.
That's correct.
Understood. Fantastic.
And then if there's any additions that people want to do to their property, they can still do that. So say they want to add on a room in the back, or they want to add on a second story, as long as the addition meets the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, then the city or the county would allow them to do the addition. And even though it's counterintuitive to what most people think, they want it to match the historic fabric of the building, it's actually supposed to not match. So it needs to be where you can tell the difference between the historic resource and the new addition. So say you have a craftsman house and you want to put on a second story. It has to be compatible with the craftsman. So it's either going to be something that's completely modern, or it's going to have like a different siding. So say the siding of the house currently is shingle, and the siding of the addition would be just regular vertical, horizontal siding. Then that would be the difference.
So they distinguish each other from one from the other.
Right.
Understood. Great. So there's lots of flexibility I'm hearing from you. We just have to get past some of those urban legends that people are just mistakenly aware or unaware of what really can be done to maintain historic fabric of their property and have some of the creature comforts and luxury items that technology and interior designers and architects have afforded us as homeowners.
That's right. And you can even, if their property didn't have air conditioning when you moved in, you could put in air conditioning. There's ways to hide those air conditioning units. And if it's a flat roof, they have new technology that makes it so that the air conditioning is kind of flat on there. So the technology is incredible, and the way that it's improved over the years to be able to put in the comforts so that you can live in historic property.
And to that, on that note, solar, right? So there's other green technologies that allow for historic homes to take advantage of things like solar energy.
That's right. And as any property within the city of San Diego, other municipalities may be different. If you want to get solar panels, just have to be approved by the Historic Resources Department, even if the house is not historically designated. So if it's 45 years old or older, it needs to get a permit for that. And as long as it doesn't detract too much from the street view, then it's okay.
Fantastic. Great. So we've learned a lot with Ginger today. I'm Keith York with Agents of Architecture. Thank you, Ginger, so much for spending time with us today.